kind of distractions or preoccupations we have from our day. And we use the breath to do that. And I'm sure all of you have a technique that you can use with the breath to focus the mind. And after a few minutes in silence, then I'll lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation of bodhicitta for tonight. So I'll ring the bell to begin. So now to set our motivation for tonight, I'm actually going to sort of jump ahead to the very end of tonight's class when I hope to cover in brief at least this topic of how we see compassion and emptiness sort of coming together. This goes back to some verses of homage that is in, these are from Chandrakirti's Supplement to the Middle Way, where he starts off by saying, that the first type of compassion that we generally are generating, that is the root of our bodhicitta, is the compassion that is simply observing sentient beings through the lens of their suffering, seeing that sentient beings have been under the control of their karma and delusions, continuing to experience this unsatisfactory state of cyclic existence, samsara. And it can move us greatly when we simply have that observation of sentient beings through that lens. of seeing the extent to which they are suffering. But then we add on 2 elements of wisdom. The second type of compassion is compassion where we are observing them in terms of their impermanence, coming to see that sentient beings are fleeting, transitory, that everything about them is constantly changing, going from life to life, even within this life, changing momentarily. And yet sentient beings cling to the opposite. They cling to the idea of permanence, trying to find something that is solid and stable and unchanging in the midst of this impermanent existence. So when we see beings through that lens, we see this truth of impermanence, that we ourselves and all conditioned phenomena are subject to change, changing moment by moment. And this should, again, break our hearts to an even greater degree, because if sentient beings simply were aware of that impermanence, embrace that impermanence, they wouldn't experience so much suffering by clinging to the opposite, desiring something that is unchanging, permanent. And then we finally arrive at the compassion that is infused with the wisdom of seeing sentient beings in terms of their emptiness. This is called compassion observing the unapprehendable, because true existence cannot be apprehended. Although sentient beings cling to themselves and all phenomena as inherently existent, this is in direct contradiction to how things exist, just as we've been exploring in this course. And of course, this is the deeper root of suffering. Yes, sentient beings suffer due to the clinging to permanence, but this is the greater error that is being made by all beings in samsara, continuing to believe in this false appearance, to cling to themselves as inherently existent beings, solid, concrete. And as we've been discerning, this does not exist at all, not an atom of inherent existence. So here too, it should break our hearts to an even greater degree when we see that it's simply due to this basic error that sentient beings are suffering. In this way, we unite our compassion with the wisdom that knows these beings are empty of inherent existence, that knows that all phenomena are empty of inherent existence. And our compassion becomes even greater because we become more determined to realize emptiness ourselves and then to lead others to that same state, having that direct realization and proceeding on the path all the way to enlightenment. So unite this with bodhicitta then, informing your bodhicitta with these 2 as well. So it's not just a compassionate wish to benefit all beings by becoming a Buddha, but to unite that with the wisdom that sees others and ourselves through the wisdom of emptiness, and knows that all of this error that we've been making since beginningless time can be undone. We can be free of our ignorance once and for all. And this gives us great courage and determination to develop ourselves all the way to complete Buddhahood, and then to lead others to that same state. Okay, good. It's good to see you all tonight. So we are wrapping up this course. We were kind of getting towards the end of our little booklet that I put together. Again, I'll probably be doing some revisions to this booklet for the next time I teach it. Probably every time I teach it, I'll have some additions and deletions and what have you. We did skip a few verses in the middle, but we're on the 4th section out of these 6 sections, and there's only a couple of verses for the 2 remaining after the 4th section. Let's go ahead and go back to the slides, and I'll kind of get grounded in where we're at. Let me do the slideshow here. again, oops, I forgot to put in the outline. Sorry. Well, the outline essentially, we were in the fourth part, which was called Investigating the Self of Phenomena. Prior to this, in the third part, we were looking at investigating the self of persons. So here we're talking about, we could certainly apply a lot of this to persons as well, just as you could apply some of the reasonings around persons to phenomena, phenomena being anything that is not a person. So this would include all the objects of our senses and all these other phenomena that exist that are not people, not beings. But here we're looking, at this whole concept of production. And we began this discussion towards the end of last week in introducing what's called the diamond slivers analysis, which is on page 8 of your booklet, right in that very first verse of Investigating the Self of Phenomena. This comes from Nagarjuna's Fundamental Wisdom. It's the very first verse of the chapter, or I'm sorry, the entire text after the homage that he pays. So it spells out very clearly the four possibilities of how things could be produced if they were produced inherently. And he's denying it right from the beginning, saying that this cannot happen, that nothing can be produced, first of all, from itself, nor can it be produced from another. And again, we have to qualify that, meaning an inherently existent other, something that is totally different than the phenomenon being produced. Nor is it produced from both, from something that is self and other. Nor is it without a cause, causelessly. And of course, three of these alternatives don't arise at all. We don't even find them conventionally. Something doesn't arise from itself or newly arise from itself. It doesn't arise from something that is both, and it doesn't arise from something that from nothing. And it always has some sort of a cause. So without a cause would be an impossibility for production, even in a conventional sense. But the idea from another, again, we have to qualify that, like I said, because in the Prasangika Madhyamika point of view that we're studying, things are produced from something that is other, but only nominally other, only merely imputed other. There is a continuity of some part of that that becomes the newly produced phenomenon. There's nothing that is completely and utterly destroyed. This is what would be entailed if it was something inherently other. So Nagarjuna says, in regard to all four of these alternatives, from none of those, neither does anything whatsoever anywhere arise. You cannot find phenomena arising in that way. So I'm not going to go back over all the other the slides that I did, but whoops, sorry. I do want to go forward in terms of a few other slides that I didn't get to. This is where Jeffrey Hopkins is commenting on this first verse of Nagarjuna as part of his book, Meditation on Emptiness. He says the reasoning that is being put forward here is composed of a thesis. Recall, again, we've talked about these before. I think I alluded to it in this course, and certainly some of you have done some study around syllogisms. A syllogism consists of a thesis and then a proof or a reason. A thesis always has two elements to it, a subject and a predicate. And so the subject here is plural. It's things, meaning functioning things, those things that are produced from causes and conditions. Those things are not inherently produced. That's the predicate. And then the question would be why? And the reason or the proof is because of not being produced from themselves, from naturally existent others. Again, this is a synonym, a hypothetical synonym for inherently existent, objectively existent, substantially existent, all the sort of synonyms for that idea. So it's not produced from naturally existent others. It's also not produced from both or causelessly. So we have kind of these four alternatives that are being set out that are part of the proof. If we can prove that it's not produced from something that is itself, that is completely inherently other, from something that is both or without any cause, then we've refuted inherent production, because inherent production would have to entail one of those alternatives. There's no fifth alternative as to how things might be produced. So these four reasons, Jeffrey Hopkins says, are themselves each theses which are non-affirming negatives. Again, I haven't used this term so much. I mentioned it last week briefly, but I thought it was important to touch on this in a course on emptiness. So I'm going to do a little bit more on that and what that really means. But the idea is that a non-affirming negative phenomena are those phenomena that are negating something other than that. So they are producing an object of knowledge by virtue of negating something we can know by negating something else. And so they're non-affirming in that, as it says here, they do not imply anything positive in their place, such as the existence of no production from self. So they're not implying kind of the opposite of that in any way. They're just simply a mere absence, a mere negation without any other further implication. So one example, I'm going to show you a little bit more from Jeffrey Hopkins, his book where he talks about non-affirming negatives. But one of the examples of an affirming negative that'll give an illustration of this is when we use the term a mountainless plane. So if you think of a plane that is stretching out, if it's mountainless, then it's a negation, right? It's saying there are no mountains on the plane, but it is affirming a plane within that absence. So this is an affirming negative. Whereas what's going to be pointed out by Jeffrey Hopkins later, the non-existence of the horns of a rabbit. Of course, it was kind of funny. This horns of a rabbit is used a lot in the debates. And here in New Mexico, right, and even in the Southwest, they have those jackalopes, right? So I took one of these postcards of a jackalope that somebody had doctored to make it look like there were horns on the rabbit. And I took it over to Geshe Tenzin Temple, he was one of the teachers over in the master's program that was doing one of these classes. And he looked so stymied when he saw that picture of a jackalope. He was like, there are rabbits with horns. But anyway, this non-existence of horns of a rabbit or the child of a barren woman, these are another example of non-existence. They don't imply anything in the midst of that absence, right? They're not saying that there's something else that's on the head of a rabbit. They're not saying that there's some other property to a woman who is barren. They're just simply asserting the something that doesn't exist. And that's it. It's again a mere absence, a mere negation. And this is what we need to be realizing within emptiness, is not that we're affirming something in the midst of that. We're simply going to abide in that place of this mere absence. This is where we should be arriving at in terms of our reasonings and all the various things we've been using in this course. So let's go on to see what else Jeffrey Hopkins has to say. He says, still, we can say that they do imply another non-affirming negative, each of these four, that things are not inherently produced, which was our thesis, right? Things, the subject, are not inherently produced, the predicate, because all four of these negatives, things are not produced from themselves, from a naturally existent other, from both, or from no cause, causelessly. Because, as it says there, although non-affirming negatives do lack positive implications, they can imply other non-affirming negatives of the same type. So we can use them as a reasoning by getting to the non-affirming negative of things not arising, not being inherently produced from self, not being inherently produced from a naturally existent other, and so on. We can, by getting to understand each of those individually, we can affirm this other non-affirming negative. We can imply that other non-affirming negative. So they don't affirm positive phenomena, but they do affirm or uphold the other non-affirming negative, that things are not inherently produced. So to look at that a little bit further, because I realize this gets to be a lot of words that we're throwing around, this is the one of the appendices in Meditation on Emptiness. Jeffrey Hopkins talks about negatives, negations, and he gives the definition of a non-affirming negative. It's a negative which is such that the term expressing it does not suggest in place of the negation another positive phenomenon, which is its own object of suggestion. So again, the negative of the mountainless plane, while it does negate the mountains on the plane, it doesn't, it affirms and suggests a plane that is there without those mountains on it. It's absent of those mountains. So the plane is affirmed in the midst of this. So it's an affirming negative. Here, again, we are not affirming any positive phenomenon. So then Jeffrey Hopkins goes on to say, for example, the one I told you, the non-existence of the horns of a rabbit, is expressed by the sentence, the horns of a rabbit do not exist. And this does not suggest anything positive in place of the horns of a rabbit. You're not affirming anything in the midst of that. You're simply negating that the horns of a rabbit exist, right? And this is what we're doing with emptiness, right? We are negating that an inherently existent I, or inherent existent production, as we're doing in this section, that these things exist. Though it can suggest another non-affirming negative, such as the non-existence of the beauty of the horns of a rabbit, just like they say, the age of a child of a barren woman, that would be another one. Well, how can you talk about the age of a child of a barren woman? Because that's also negated when you've negated a child of a barren woman. So in the same way that we've negated the horns of a rabbit, we've negated any beauty to those horns, or the color of those horns, or the shape of those horns, anything else that would be attached to that non-existent phenomenon. So while that can be suggested, another non-affirming negative, it does not suggest any positive phenomenon in place of its object of negation. It's not setting forth anything that can be positively affirmed. In this same vein, an emptiness merely eliminates inherent existence. It does not imply anything positive in its place. Though emptiness is compatible with conventional existence, because this is what I've been driving home in terms of going into dependent arising first, dependent arising and emptiness are pointing to the same reality. And dependent arising is conventional existence. This is how things exist conventionally, depending upon their causes and conditions, their parts, and in the end, depending upon a conceptual designation, imputation. So, it does not suggest conventional existence in place of its object of negation, but still it is stressed, he says, that a proper understanding of emptiness acts to assist an understanding of conventional existence. And I would say even vice versa. He doesn't say vice versa, but this is why we use dependent arising as the king of reasonings, right? Because when we come to understand how things exist conventionally, it can lead us to a proper understanding of emptiness. So these do act in tandem to help us to get at the nature of reality. But this is emphasizing that from the side of emptiness, from looking at this negation of inherent existence, it is not affirming conventional existence. It is simply abiding with that mere absence of inherent existence. This is what we are knowing and what we are aiming to know through our investigation into emptiness, the object that we are seeking to realize. And emptiness, he goes on to say, is the mere elimination of inherent or objective existence, and thus is a mere negative, a non-affirming negative, a mere absence of its object of negation, just like the non-existence of the horns of a rabbit. Just simply setting that forward as just what it is. The period stops. There's nothing else implied. You're not implying conventional existence by virtue of that. So now back to where he was talking about this earlier in meditation on emptiness, continuing with where I was before I went to that little diversion to the appendix. It says here, the reasoning which proves that things are not inherently produced does not establish that things are nominally or conventionally produced. Just as I was saying, based on that passage from the appendix, right? The diamond slivers are non-affirming negatives, and just the absence of inherently existent production, not the presence of nominal production, is realized when inferring or directly cognizing the emptiness of production. Remember, way back at the beginning of the course, we talked about how we are leading away from our wrong consciousness, and the last two steps are an inferential cognition, and then a direct cognition, direct awareness, realizing emptiness directly. So in either of those, you are not realizing the presence of nominal production. And understanding of nominal production can feed into your understanding of emptiness, but you are realizing the mere absence of inherently existent production. Okay. The four negative theses, he says, do not serve as proofs of another thesis that things are not inherently produced. And I'm sorry, I read that wrong. The four negative theses do serve as proofs of another thesis that things are not inherently produced, and thus their import can be stated syllogistically as above, just like we saw in the syllogism that he put forward when we began this discussion of that verse, that things, the subject, are not inherently produced. Why? Because of all four of these that can be established, not inherently produced from self, not inherently produced from other, not inherently produced from both and from nothing, out of without any cause. All right. So let's look at this example that kind of gives us a good idea of this. This is what's used in Chandrakirti's text, is the example of the seed and the sprout. And I found this nice little graphic on the internet of like a bean that is over where on the left-hand side that you see that, a bean is essentially a seed. There are many types of seeds. And you put the bean in the ground, of course, and when it's surrounded by nutrients, it's got warmth and moisture and so on, whatever is necessary, it begins to germinate. And you have a movement in the second from the left of something beginning to crack open the shell of the seed, right? And then you have in the third one quite a bit later. I mean, this happens probably relatively shortly in time-wise, but nonetheless, this is quite a development, right? Because you have this whole little piece that comes down that becomes part of the roots, and then you have in the next one, the bit that comes up that becomes the sprout that is up above the ground, or the seedling. And so you see that when we look at something like this that is happening, again, so we've got, these six different images in front of us. It's not something that we can see going on right immediately in front of us as they do in those stop action films and what have you. But we can gain an appreciation for how there is simply a process that is going on here of a sprout being produced from a seed, or even beyond the sprout to a plant that eventually can become the entire, bean plant that would give forth more beans and so on. So essentially you have this process that is simply occurring and nothing is being produced from itself, right? Because when we look at something on the left and compare that to something that's all the way to the right, we see that these are absolutely not identical. We might see some similarities with regard to the intermediate stages that are occurring there, but it's not produced from something that is inherently the same as it, that is identical to it. Again, we don't even see that conventionally. Things are always produced from something that is other. We call that a seed on the left. Again, I don't know which one you'd call a sprout. Jeffrey Hopkins, and I think in his Emptiness Yoga, he said that one Tibetan teacher said that a sprout was like 20 inches high. And we usually don't refer to something that's 20 inches off the ground, as being a sprout. But if we say that the sprout is even the third one from the left, then we would essentially say that, yes, these are different phenomena. We're calling one a seed and we're calling one a sprout, but they're not inherently different. If they were inherently different, then the seed could never become the sprout. The seed would be its own entity and be completely unchanging in that. And the sprout would be completely unchanging and unrelated to the seed. So the essence of the seed brought forth the sprout, but the seed ceases to exist by the time you get to the third one from the left, right? You no longer have what you call a seed, and you certainly don't have what you call a sprout when you go all the way to the left and look at the seed. So the seed and the sprout have a relationship of arising within production that is nominally designated, that is a dependent arising, that doesn't have any inherent existence, because otherwise they would be completely and utterly unrelated. They also, of course, don't arise from something that is both. We might get that idea. We might go, well, oh, way over on the left there, when you talk about that bean or seed, you're talking about something that kind of has similarities to it, has some sort of sameness, because it has all the little, matter that is going to give rise to a sprout and the whole bean seed and or the bean plant and what have you. And then you might say, but it's also different. But again, if you've proven that it can't happen from self and that it can't happen from something that is completely, utterly different, then you can't have something that is both. Even though we might have thoughts that something, that produces something else has kind of both those similarities and differences, nonetheless, it can't be arising from both, because it can't be arising from them individually. And then the fourth idea, again, that these Charvakas hold, that things just arise causelessly. Well, we know that this isn't true. If you have a farmer that wants to plant or wants to have a bean crop at the end of the year, when the growing year, well, then they know that they have to put the beans into the soil, or else they never get the plants. They know that things don't arise causelessly, that they don't just look out on their field and suddenly all of these bean plants are there. So this is, again, a good example that shows, how the production of things is arising in this way that was really just nominal production. There can't be any inherent production, because otherwise things, once more, would be completely the same if they arise from self. So there'd be no difference between the seed and the sprout, or they have to be utterly different if they are completely naturally different. And therefore, you wouldn't have any causal process arising at all. And again, we can then refute it being both. And of course, we find that things don't arise causelessly. As I said, 3 of those options don't even arise in conventional existence. We don't say that something newly arises from something that is the same as it, from something that is both, nor from no cause whatsoever. Things arise from their respective causes and conditions. So this is interesting, because this reasoning, and as we're going to see in some of the commentary I'm going to share with you, kind of takes us back around to dependent arising. Because even though, again, as I was emphasizing with this non-affirming negation, we are trying to realize the mere absence of inherent production, the emptiness of inherent production, nonetheless, we can see how within that, our understanding of how things arise on the basis of causes and conditions is completely upheld. Dependent arising at the coarsest level is proving, to a large degree, the same thing that our reasoning is proving, that things cannot arise inherently. They cannot be arising from inherent causes and conditions, because that dependence upon causes and conditions immediately negates them having any inherent existence. That's where the more you work with these two, and that's why, again, I talked about this earlier, but you want to go back and forth with these, bring your dependent arising into play, especially if you start seeing yourself moving into a nihilistic bent, and then go back to your emptiness and sort of make that very strong, so that you move away from that other precipice, the other extreme of the sort of eternalism and the existence that we're clinging to in terms of inherent existence. So we kind of keep doing this, each of these reasonings until, we find that perfect middle way. So you have the different reasonings. I wasn't able to go into. I think there's 1 or 2 more that are in Meditation on Emptiness that are a little bit harder to work with, but these are the main ones that we've talked about. Again, we did the 4-point analysis that is generally applied to the person. Then we extended it to the 5-fold reasoning of Nagarjuna that is sort of an elaboration on whether there is sameness or difference. And then we went to the 7-fold analysis of Chandrakirti, which takes an even further elaboration on sameness and difference. So all of those working with the person, and then here looking at inherent production, and they all drive to the same conclusion, that you cannot find things to exist inherently. Whether we talk about the person, whether we talk about phenomena that are produced, all of this can be proven through our reasoning, that emptiness can be upheld. Then inherent existence does not exist at all. So this is some nice advice from Khensur Jampa Tekchok, again, the book that I've been encouraging you to read as part of this course. That's really quite amazing. The more time I spend with it, the more I really like this book. It should be kind of like a textbook for courses on emptiness. He says there, while seeds and sprouts are used as examples to help us become familiar with the reasoning, in our meditation, we should contemplate these points with respect to our bodies, our feelings, our minds, the 12 links of dependent arising, bodhisattva deeds, and so on. Understanding the emptiness of these conditioned things will have a strong effect on our minds. Even understanding the lack of an inherently produced Buddha, right? Our future Buddhahood. Think about your own future state of Buddhahood. That is going to be an effect, a product of all the causes and conditions that lead up to that. And we can see that it cannot be produced from something that is the same as it, something that is utterly different, or else it wouldn't be our continuum of this ordinary being now that becomes a future Buddha, and so on. We can use the same analysis, and especially it's good to use it with regard to those phenomena that we feel a lot of afflictive emotions in regard to, a great attachment to, or great anger towards. We can begin to see that these things are not inherently produced. They cannot have any inherent existence from their side. Well, then again, we begin to let go of that. We begin to see the illusory nature of things, which is the next section that we're actually going to go into in terms of our studies in this course. So having examined, he says, the 4 alternatives for how effects could arise if arising were inherently existent, we find that none of them can be established either by reasoning or experience. Some of them just by experience, right? We don't see that things arise causelessly. As I said, you don't just look out in your backyard and see a vegetable garden that you never planted, suddenly appear. It all comes from its respective causes and conditions. So then he says, the arising of something new cannot occur from itself, from a cause that is inherently other, from both, or causelessly. Yet we know things arise. How do they arise? They arise in dependence on other factors. If we reflect well on dependent arising, we will understand this ever more clearly, and eventually the net of wrong views will vanish. So this is this whole idea again of how we are moving back and forth between these two to get away from these two extremes. As I have pointed out, this is where we're abiding, coming into this whole game of Buddhism. We don't realize it. We don't cling as tightly to it in a conscious way, but we can see that when we begin to be introduced to teachings on emptiness, it starts to threaten where we've been and kind of move us away from this strong adherence to things as if they existed inherently. But then there's that tendency, once we begin to know some of that, to fall into the other extreme, to suddenly end up in this space of thinking things don't exist at all. If they aren't inherently produced, if they aren't inherently existent, then how are they upheld? That's because, once more, we are reinforced by this strong appearance of an inherent existence from the side of everything that we see. They say that every single consciousness of a ordinary being, and that even an Arya being all the way up through till Buddhahood, unless they are meditating on emptiness and realizing emptiness directly, there is always the stain of an appearance of inherent existence. They are always dealing with that coming back at us. Everything seems to be so real and established from its own side. So we're kind of fighting against that and using our reasoning to kind of move in that direction. But it is true that, when we do start seeing this emptiness, it can often negate the mere existence of things, because that's how things seem to exist, right? They seem to have their own identity. Why a bean plant can be arising from the bean seed itself is because we think there's something inherent within there that is guiding the whole process. Well, things do have their respective causes and conditions, but it's not inherent. It's the identity, once more, is given through the force of our mere designation, conceptualization. There's complete, upholding of dependent arising within all of this. So we keep using these two to kind of get back from the extremes that we can fall into until, as I said, we find that perfect middle way between these two. So any questions on this so far? I think it's good to open it up to questions before we do the last couple little verses that I'm not going to really comment on too much in this section, because we'll be going on to another section after that. Anything? All right, everybody's on board. Sounds good to me. Okay, good. Let's go forward then. And we've got these two more verses that are on page 8 at the bottom, and then on top of page 9. This is from Chandrakirti's supplement to the Middle Way. And this is where he is proving this same thesis that we just looked at, the diamond slivers reasoning. Because things are not produced causelessly, we don't see things arising without any causes. He even throws in this idea, or from Ishvara and so forth, as causes. In our culture, we'd say, or from a creator god, and so forth. Ishvara has that kind of role in the Vedic traditions, kind of being the creator of things. So things are not produced causelessly or from some sort of permanent eternal cause. If people talk about what they mean by a creator God, I would say there's probably some of that idea that it's sort of an eternal, unchanging being that is there, that is some sort of force from which things arise. Well, in Buddhist terms, it doesn't make sense that something that is permanent and unchanging could bring forth something that is impermanent and changing. Things are impermanent and changing. How could something that is permanent and unchanging produce that? Or he goes into the other three parts of the thesis I'm sorry, not thesis, from the proof, or from self, from other, and by this it's shorthand for inherently other or naturally existent other, or both. And then why? Because those things don't exist, they are simply dependently produced. He arrives at that same conclusion, that we can say that things are produced dependently. They don't arise in any of these ways inherently. Inherent production doesn't exist. So he's kind of coming at it from the same angle of what we just looked at as a proof of emptiness, but asserting in the end the reality of dependent arising. Let's go on to the next slide, which is an immediate verse following from Chandrakirti. He says, since things are dependently arisen, they cannot sustain these conceptions of being produced from self, other, and so forth. Therefore, this reasoning of dependent arising cuts through all the nets of bad views, just as Khensur Jampa Tekchok was saying in his text, right? So dependent arising, once more, is the king of reasonings. It's well worth using that as a regular tool in our analyses of emptiness to make sure that we don't fall into that extreme by recognizing how things still arise. Everything comes into existence. It just doesn't have any inherent existence, any inherent production. So again, I'm not going to comment on those much more. Whoops. Let's go on to the next outline. There's the course outline that I meant to put in there before the verse for tonight. We just completed the fourth section, investigating the self of phenomena. Now we're going to go into analogies for contemplation using a verse from the Vajrakutta Sutra that is in the prayers that we often do on Sunday, right? And Rinpoche has taught on this, and I'm going to use some of Rinpoche's teachings to help elucidate these various analogies or similes. And then the final topic that we'll get into tonight that I already touched on in the meditation was compassion and emptiness, how these two can reinforce each other. So this is the verse. You might recognize it from the FPMT prayer book, right? And this is how Venerable George translates it in the Vajrakutta Sutra, the entire sutra, which is a wonderful sutra to read and to kind of, it keeps working with this idea of how things are nominally existent and how they lack any inherent existence. And towards the very end, this is just like right before the conclusion of the sutra, there's this wonderful quote that says, as a star, a visual aberration, a lamp, there's three there. The next four, an illusion, dew, a bubble, a dream, and then the last two, lightning and a cloud. View all the compounded like that. View all compounded phenomena, conditioned phenomena, causative phenomena, everything that is produced from causes and conditions. We can see them through the lens of these 9 similes or examples for understanding their empty nature, but also, of course, understanding their impermanent nature, because they are causative phenomena. They arise from various causes and conditions. So let's look at the 9 similes in terms of, oops, it's supposed to say adopted from oral commentary. Sorry, somehow I left the F out of there. And that may be on the remaining slides in this section because I'm going through each of these individually. This is how Rinpoche explains a star. Now, I'm guessing that there are other explanations of the star, but I don't have any other commentaries on the Vajrakutta Sutra. Actually, there's one that was published not so long ago from the Chan tradition, Chan Buddhism, but I haven't seen that yet. But this is how Rinpoche talks about it. You know, when a star is appearing at dawn, this happens here in New Mexico in the winter, right? When the sky is so clear on some of these mornings, and you might go outside and the sun isn't up yet, and you see, you know, the star still shining, even though the light is beginning to come into the sky. The sun hasn't come up yet. But it's not visible in the sky once the sun shines. So once you have the light of the sun, and we're in that, you know, that space of light, the stars don't appear. So similarly, when the wisdom of those who have realized emptiness shines, the eye is seen as completely empty of inherent existence. So this makes it seem like, again, in the darkness of night, which is the darkness of our ignorance, the stars are appearing. Things appear to be real, you know, things appear to be inherently existent. But then once the wisdom of the sun shines, then we no longer have that cognizance, because we see that what was appearing to us as an inherently existent eye doesn't exist at all. Now, again, I'm guessing that there are probably other explanations of it. It doesn't work as well in my mind because the stars are still there, even though the sun is shining, right? You know, we just can't see them because the light of the sun shooting into our atmosphere blocks us from seeing the stars. But, you know, at the time of the Buddha, they didn't know all the history of what stars were. I mean, I made the Buddha's omniscient, so the Buddha would know all of these things, but the culture didn't know it, right? They didn't know what a star was, you know, that a star was essentially the light coming from, you know, light years away away, and the star is, long gone by the time the light reaches us often, right? So the idea behind that might be an interesting one in terms of an illusion then, right? Because what we see that seems to be so real as light coming from a star is actually light that has, came from that star so long ago. And of course, the star itself might be utterly non-existent. And so in that way, I think that also could work as a way of working with this analogy, but I'm just putting that forward from my own very basic understanding of what's going on with stars and what have you. But so I think there's probably other ways you could interpret this. But this is how Rinpoche chooses to work with it, and from his study and teachings he's had, and I'm sure there's great validity to it. I'm not challenging it. I'm just saying that, again, it doesn't work as well for me because the stars are still there in the daytime. It's just that the wisdom of emptiness, or the light of that sun, isn't seeing them. So it doesn't work quite as well. I don't know. Maybe it works for you. But the other ones are really quite nice because these get into the whole territory of what we often call these illusions that are used by the Buddha to refer to how things can falsely appear. As I was saying a few minutes ago, everything other than in the meditative equipoise of an Arya being realizing emptiness, every single moment of the minds of beings until they reach enlightenment is together with that false appearance. We have something appearing in one way, but existing in another way. So again, it doesn't work as well in my mind for the star thing, but I haven't heard of any other, ways of it being explained. So I'm just really taking a stab in the dark with the one that I mentioned even. A visual aberration, what they say this is like if you, it could be when you have something like jaundice where you're seeing everything is yellow, because of the yellowness that's caused through having that disease, through your liver being infected and what have you, then you have a tint of yellow to all the things that you're seeing. But the example that's frequently used, let me actually take it back off screen, is when you press up against your eyeball. Don't do this really hard, uh, this is only for trained professionals, right? You press up against your eyeball and you can see things kind of doubling, right? There's like a double appearance of something. That's sometimes what they say is this. So if you looked up at the moon or something at night, not your computer or whatever, you might, press your eye and you could see there's two moons. And there's not really two moons, right? You're just simply, this is a visual aberration. It's something that is causing a sort of defective view. It's causing you to see two moons when there's really only one moon up in the sky. We're not on some planet with multiple moons. So this is the idea behind this second one, is that this visual aberration, when we have this, or what Rinpoche likes to call a defective view, what appears to you seems real, but it is not, right? You think you're seeing two moons, but those two moons are not really there. There's only one moon. Similarly, causative phenomena, produced phenomena, appear to be truly existent but are not. This is, again, the very simple way of looking at these various similes, is just to recognize that they're referring to something that we think could be existing in one way because of how it appears, but we come to understand that it actually exists in a different way. The third one, a lamp. This is more specifically referring to a butter lamp. In Tibetan culture, they have these, they use yak butter and produce these lamps. The yak butter solidifies into the base of a metal bowl. They put a wick in it and it lights and stays lit for a fair amount of time, like an oil lamp that we have in our culture. The butter lamp exists dependent on many causes and conditions, right? You have to have the oil, the butter from the yak, you have to have the wick, you have to have the flame that's introduced, the bowl that it's holding, and you have various things that come together for that lamp to produce the light. So all compounded phenomena are the same, not existing on their own. So this is once more pointing back. As I said, some of these tend to point mostly to the conditionality of phenomena. But as we saw when we went through dependent arising, conditionality proves lack of inherent existence. Because if something depends upon causes and conditions, it cannot exist independently. It cannot exist on its own. It can't set itself up because it depends upon other things for its existence, for it to come into existence. So this is the whole idea behind these. We're going to see a number of these because all of these, again, are causative phenomena. Stars, visual aberration, lamps, what have you. We're looking at anything that isn't caused. An illusion, I'm assuming, Rinpoche didn't go into this in talking about what illusion is being referred to, but the one that is often set out in a number of these philosophical texts is what's called a magician's illusion, where they take, again, like a stick and a rock or a stone, and they cast a spell and put some sort of salve over the eyes of the beings who are all there watching this, the people who are in the room, the audience, and there becomes this appearance of like a horse and an elephant. In our magic that we have with magicians who are living today, they do something similar. They don't put salve over our eyes, but they create illusions, right? Like, what's the one guy, is it David Copperfield or whatever, who does these huge things of like making whole buildings seem to disappear, And so you have this illusion that occurs, and the audience falsely believes in it, right? We believe that what we have witnessed in the illusion is real. That's what makes it an illusion, right? Is that it seems to be real, but it actually isn't. It's falsely believed. So too, true existence appears, but does not exist in reality. Now, again, when we think that things are like an illusion, this is a very prominent way to go about looking at things in our lives, that they're illusory. Not that they are an illusion, that there's nothing about them that is real. There is, again, some level of reality that we can establish in terms of their dependent arising nature, their conventional nature. We don't make them utterly non-existent, but nonetheless, we see that there's an illusory quality because they appear to be so real, but they lack that level of reality. It's not, again, that they don't exist at all, but rather that they don't have that mode of existence, the mode of having inherent or intrinsic existence. Dew, sometimes you say a drop of dew. I think this is the translation in the FPMT prayer book, says a drop of dew. Well, dewdrops, Rinpoche says, can appear at any time and are thus not definite. Based on the conditions, again, that moisture in the air and what's going on in terms of, the temperatures and everything. And then these drops can appear out on the leaves of trees and what have you, on the windows of our cars and in the same way, all conditioned phenomena are impermanent and can cease at any time. They can come into existence and then they can very quickly go out of existence. All those causes and conditions come together for them, and then the sun shines on the dew on your car window and it's gone, it evaporates, it's over. It's kind of just pointing again, and this impermanent nature of things also, as we went into last week, when Bob was bringing up this idea of like the measure of when we have things existing inherently, if things did exist inherently, they couldn't change. There couldn't be any sort of causal process going on. They couldn't go out of existence. They would be inherently there all the time. So again, that understanding is negated by understanding something like how dewdrops appear. They come into existence on a variety of factors, and then they go out of existence because of the heat of the sun and what have you, the evaporation that occurs. This is, once more, a way of even proving that they lack any inherent existence, but it's an example, an analogy that we can use to understand how everything is like that. Things coming into existence and then going out of existence, especially with regard to our own selves, our own, bodies and what have you, that there's nothing sort of eternal and lasting about these, but rather continual change. A water bubble looks very beautiful, but can pop at any time, Rinpoche says, and cannot therefore be trusted. We can't like take that water bubble that happens, when you run water quickly into a bucket or something and all these bubbles appear. You can't like take them with you and, they're not some sort of lasting thing, right? The nature of a water bubble is that the membrane is very, very sensitive to any sort of movement or any kind of air or any brushing up against it. Likewise, no matter how beautiful all these phenomena appear that are causative, they're impermanent. He highlights beautiful because, again, this can be useful as a way of counteracting our attachment. That when we see these beautiful water bubbles or whatever, that's like all the beautiful things in our world that are just appearing for a moment and then they change. They cannot be trusted. They don't have that nature of being inherently beautiful. That beauty is not lasting. Things will always fade and change over time. The seventh one is a dream, which I refer to frequently as one of my favorite analogies that the Buddha used because I think it really works for me, but may not work as well for everyone. But everything that appears in a dream, Rinpoche says, is not real. even in our conventional sense, or you can say there is a conventional dream object without a doubt, but it is not, it doesn't have a referent in terms of our waking world. What we witness in a dream isn't real in the way that our waking life is, in terms of being able to find things that are the phenomena that are appearing and so on. We can find them conventionally, but in our dreams, you cannot find those conventionally. When you've been dreaming about all these things going on while you're in your bed at night asleep, when you wake up and open up your eyes, all those things aren't there. So like this, all things are not real. But again, this is a different level of reality, this not existing from their own side. This is how we see reality, not just in our dream state, because it does affect that, but primarily in our waking state. We think that things have a level of reality in a similar way to the way that we adhere to things in our dreams. A flash of lightning happens, but the next moment it is gone. This is another one of these that's pointing more to the conditionality of things. This life and all conditioned things are similar in their impermanence. So again, we can use it to realize both the impermanence and the emptiness of things, because by virtue of things being impermanent, they cannot be inherently existent. We don't use it as an equivalent. It doesn't mean that impermanence, without a doubt, if people understand impermanence, they've understood emptiness, but it is a stepping stone. It helps us to recognize that because of the changing, fleeting nature of things appearing and then being gone, that right there points to the fact that they cannot have any inherent existence, as we just discussed last week. So the ninth of these similes is a cloud. Clouds appear in the sky, but they change and even disappear, right? You look up at the sky, some of these wonderful winter mornings, we have, amazing clouds appearing on the horizon and what have you, and it happens at sunset too. But sometimes during the day, the clouds all seem to disappear, right? The sun is shining, and due to all the various factors, the moisture in the air, evaporates again and the clouds are gone. This is the nature of clouds, right? And just like clouds, all things are subject to change and do not last. So again, this is once more pointing to their conditionality, but implicit within that is an understanding of their emptiness. Things appearing on the variety of causes and conditions and then disappearing, they cannot exist inherently. They cannot be produced inherently. So Rinpoche goes on to say, and since we have our holidays coming up with the break that we'll have for a few weeks here, this is kind of a nice thing to insert in here. He says, I want to say that meditating on this one is giving you a real holiday. This is a real vacation. It is the best vacation to the eye, a real vacation for yourself, a real holiday to you. Otherwise, physically going somewhere else, but with delusions, with all the wrong concepts, is not a real holiday. You just kind of take that, delusion with you. Rather, we can have a real vacation by taking a vacation from the grasping at inherent existence that these similes are there to help us to undermine, to actually do away with. Physically going somewhere else with all the delusions, all the hallucinations, constantly you have all those problems. However many hallucinations you have, however many delusions, wrong concepts you have all those problems. So actually you don't have a holiday, no vacation, no rest. If you meditate on this though, it gives a rest to you, a holiday to you, a holiday to your mind. By this, you achieve liberation from oceans of samsaric sufferings. Then, with bodhicitta and the realization of emptiness, ultimate truth, with bodhicitta, then you achieve full enlightenment for all sentient beings and are able to liberate numberless sentient beings from the oceans of samsaric sufferings and bring them to full enlightenment. So that's the idea behind these similes. It was interesting. I had the good fortune of being called upon to help put some courses together at the very beginning of these Light of the Path retreats. This teaching that I was quoting from was from the 2010 Light of the Path retreat. And there were working retreats after each of those that I was invited to participate in with a number of other teachers from our tradition, many of them with much more experience than I had. I felt quite humbled being there in the presence of some of these amazing teachers who've been around FPMT for much, much longer than I have. And in the 2010, I was helping to put together the whole module that's come to be known as Bringing Emptiness emptiness to life. It's part of the Living in the Path series, Module 7. If you're ever curious and want to do that, there's some wonderful teachings from Rinpoche in there about this. And one of the things I did was put together like a little kind of cards. There are 9 of them on a sheet, and each of them has each of the similes to see things, see conditioned things, causative phenomena, like a star, so on. And so you could like go through your cards every day. You could cut them up, and today I'm going to see everything like lightning, or today I'm going to see everything like, a bubble. And so it's a way to just remind yourself to use these. This is what these similes are for. This is what Rinpoche is encouraging us to do, is to actually bring this to life, bring the emptiness into our lives and the understanding of emptiness into our lives, so that we aren't grasping at things so tightly and making our minds, tying our minds in knots of ignorance and so on. That if we have this awareness as we are seeing all the various things that come into our sphere of experience, then we're reinforcing the time that we're spending off the cushion, not necessarily doing our meditation on emptiness formally, but reminding ourselves of the conditionality of emptiness, dependent arising, and so on. So any questions or comments about that? I like this verse, obviously. We use it frequently, again, on Sundays at TNL. We use it as part of the prayers that we do. And it's Rinpoche kind of threw that in there as one of the prayers to be recited before teachings, because we also need to see things as we're getting teachings in terms of understanding their causality, how they come into existence in this similar way. And all these teachings will be gone now. We'll finish this course and we're on to the next course, and everything is fleeting and temporary and transitory. But hopefully we're not, just passing it by, and we're actually going to use these teachings to the best of our ability. So we have one more subject to cover, but any other questions or comments again on this topic? Has anyone else here heard Rinpoche teach on these? Anyone want to? No? He was teaching on them again at the Light of the Path, and I think I heard him one other time. He really does, especially because he hears people reciting this prayer at the beginning of the teachings frequently, and when they get to that verse, he actually encourages you to do that verse very, very slowly and kind of think about each of these. And he even has a way of talking about the chanting of it, which is really quite nice if you chant it in the Tibetan. I didn't put the Tibetan in your little prayer, your verse book here, but all right, let's go back then to the slides, and we'll go into what we have left. Unless is there anything? Oh, wonderful. Mary is saying good news. Geshe Sherab has been asked to do a commentary on the Vajrakuta Sutra in 2021. So how wonderful. I've never received a full commentary. All that I've received is Rinpoche's, little talking about this one verse that comes from, again, the very end of it. So there's, not much that I can say about the Vajrakuta, other than, of course, there is a lot of repetition within it of various things, and talking about, bodhisattvas and how they train in the perfection of wisdom and so on. So there's a lot of wonderful stuff within it that I'm sure I could comment on, but I've never received anything formal. So that's great that Geshe Sherab will be doing that. Let's go on then to the final topic that's in your booklet, and the final thing I want to talk about for this course, because while we've spent all of the first 5 points focusing primarily on emptiness, coming to understand how we realize that through all these various reasonings, how we have to use dependent arising, all the other things to help us to find that perfect middle way, it's important that we bring that back around to our understanding of compassion. I've taught on this before. I even led a little retreat at the Immaculate Heart of Mary Retreat Center some years ago on this initial part of Chandrakirti's text. These 2 verses, well, actually a verse and a half, that are from that are paying homage to what we call the 3 types of compassion. And these are mentioned in the auto commentary by Chandrakirti, his own commentary on his text, that explains these lines as paying homage to, first, compassion observing sentient beings. We meditated on that tonight as part of the meditation, right? Where we simply are observing beings through the lens of seeing them as suffering. It's purely in the conventional realm, right? Just understanding that what is going on, our sentient beings are experiencing the varieties of suffering, going from life to life, and never having any real break from that, never any holiday, any real holiday. The second level of compassion, or type of compassion, is compassion observing phenomena. This is the name given to seeing the impermanent phenomena, the impermanent nature of beings, that we see that they are coming into existence, changing momentarily, going out of existence, that this is, again, contrary to how beings hold things and themselves. They want to hold on to something that is unchanging in the midst of all of this. And then the third is finally where we bring in the deeper wisdom, the wisdom of emptiness. As I said in the meditation tonight, this is called compassion observing the unapprehendable, because true existence, inherent existence, cannot be apprehended. So it's observing sentient beings through the lens of them lacking any inherent existence, that the sentient beings are empty of inherent existence. And yet, again, we get greater compassion because we understand that sentient beings are clinging to the opposite, just as they are clinging to things that are conditioned as if they were permanent and unchanging. They are also clinging to everything that exists as being truly existent, inherently existent. And that's the opposite to how things actually exist and how they actually exist. So these three are all great compassions. Again, I haven't talked so much about compassion in this course, but great compassion has the aspect of observing all sentient beings without exception, and has the subjective aspect of wishing that these beings be free from sufferings. And moreover, I mean, this isn't quite complete. This is from Guy Newland's text, but it's also the subjective aspect of protecting beings from suffering. This is what makes it great compassion, is that it's not just a, oh, may you over there be free from suffering. It's kind of taking an active interest in being an agent to cause that to happen. So this is what is being paid homage to by Master Chandrakirti and his texts, is this great compassion that is the awakening of our Mahayana lineage. It is what will cause us to generate bodhicitta. It is the root cause, as he points out earlier in his text, in the verses that preceded this, at the very beginning of the text, when he pays homage to this great compassion. So the very first verse that we have is about the compassion observing sentient beings. It says, homage to that compassion for migrators who are powerless, like a bucket traveling in a well, through initially adhering to a self, an I, and then generating attachment for things. This is mine. Well, that's going to remind you, those last two lines, of what we talked about earlier, the view of the transitory collection, this form of ignorance that is a view where it begins with the transitory collection, the aggregates, but the aggregates are, an I is imputed on the basis of those, and we hold to that I, that self, to be inherently existent. And then the sense of a my arises. This is still a person, but it's the sense of a person being a possessor. So we're not talking about the phenomena that are possessed. We talked about that earlier, right? We're talking about the sense of a being that is a possessor, that is involved in things. And of course, this is how we get into trouble, right? We initially concretize this sense of I, and then we look at the world that we are in, and we start thinking mine in relation to all the various things. My family and my possessions, my body, my this, my that. It becomes an extension of that I. It's still, again, the relationship is always to the person. It's not the object that we're talking about, the body itself. We're talking about the person who possesses this, the person who has that ownership. So this is how we get into trouble, right? Because then we start having all the grasping and the attachment and the desire for all those things that we consider mine. And when those things, there's an interruption to that, or somebody getting in the way of that, or we have obstacles to getting that, then we have the opposite reaction of anger, aversion, all of that, pushing away all those things that are, keeping us from enjoying what is mine. It's all driven by a sense of me and mine that, kind of goes beyond just the strong sense of an I. That's how we get entangled in the world around us. So this is what's going on with this view of the transitory collection. It is the view of personal self, elevated to that degree where we think it is inherently existent as an I, and inherently existent in terms of the mine, the possessor of that. Maybe even my might be a more appropriate term for it. I don't know why they always use mine, because my, I think, signifies more the possessor kind of component, which is still the person, whereas mine can often be referring to the things that are possessed. But nonetheless, this is the idea behind it. So let's look at what Tsongkhapa says on this. Tsongkhapa starts off by talking about the last two lines first. He says, the view of the transitory collection as a real I generates the view of that collection as real mine. Therefore, these sentient beings initially, prior to the view of the transitory adhering to real mind, adhere to an I as a truth. The view of the transitory apprehending a real I thinks that the self, which does not inherently exist, does so. It's a false apprehension. It's a wrong view. It's an incorrect view, an afflicted view. It is looking at the I that once more is merely imputed to this collection of body and mind, and it thinks it's real. And then, of course, from that sense of a real I, we then start thinking of the collection as being possessed by a real I. That's where the mind comes into play. That's what he says here. Subsequently, the view of the transitory apprehending real mine or my generates attachment for the truth of the mind, thinking this is mine with respect to phenomena other than the I, such as forms and eyes and so on. I think my eyes and my face and my body, my mind, all these things that are in our own continuum, but of course we also do it with things beyond our own continuum of the mind or body, things that are outside of it, possessions and what have you. So this is, again, that view of the transitory collection. It has sort of two flavors to it. It starts with the grasping at the I as inherently existent, whereas it's merely imputed. And then we have a sense of a mine, which also is merely imputed, but nonetheless is grasped at as if it were inherently existent. And we then have attachment arising for those. And then, as I said earlier, we have the aversion that arises when there's a threat to that attachment getting what it wants. So now he's going to go into a little explanation. I don't want to go into this in great depth, but nonetheless give you enough that you can use this analogy of a bucket in a well. So Tsongkhapa says, Chandrakirti's homage to compassion observing sentient beings is homage to compassion for migrators wandering powerlessly, like a bucket traveling in a well. So I don't know, I found the best graphic that I could for it. They technically say that you have a windlass, that is involved in this. At least this is how, the analogy is explained. So I don't, know all the mechanics of wells and how they work. But here we're talking about a water well that you drop a bucket into, and you have a mechanism by which you can draw the water up and what have you. So Chandrakirti uses the analogy of a bucket in the well to represent suffering sentient beings. So this is the analogy. Sentient beings are like the bucket, and they're in a well, and that they're in cyclic existence, but we're going to see that as one of the points that are, explained. So there are 6 features of similarity between sentient beings and the bucket and the well. First, the rope that is attached to the bucket is comparable to beings being bound by the rope of contaminated actions and afflictions. This is why we often say we're under the control of our karma and our delusions, right? Because those bind us in cyclic existence. They are the main force by which we continue to take rebirth and have all of our various experiences. And the root affliction, the root delusion, of course, is our ignorance, that view of the transitory collection that we just spoke to. But nonetheless, this is the whole mechanism by which things happen. We have these afflictions, especially our ignorance. We create actions, and those actions cause us to be in samsaric existence, samsaric experiences. Number 2, the operator of the windlass. The operator of the process of cyclic existence is an unpeaceful and untamed mind. Because we haven't tamed our minds, we haven't, as that one verse that we also recite on Sunday, subdue your mind thoroughly. We haven't subdued our minds thoroughly. Therefore, as long as we are under the control of an unpacified mind, we are going to continue to be the operator of our own stay in cyclic existence. We're the ones creating it. The operator is nothing other than our own, deluded minds. The well itself, sentient beings reside in the well of cyclic existence, just as the bucket is within the well. From the brightness at the top, which is referred to as the peak of cyclic existence, which is said to be a very, very subtle state. It's part of the formless realm, all the way down to the deep dark of the bottom of the well, the most torturous hell. That's one name for what's called unrelenting hell, the Avicii, it's often referred to, the Sanskrit name. This is the worst realm of samsara. So essentially, beings are like the bucket, residing in this well of all the various levels that are from the very top of the well and the brightness of the fresh air all the way down to the bottom of the well, but nonetheless always within the well. The bucket doesn't like go somewhere else. It's always there in this shaft, going from the worst to the best and everything in between. Fourth, the movement of the bucket and the well is actually what I was just alluding to some degree. The movement within cyclic existence is that within this idea of going to all these different realms, beings naturally and quite effortlessly descend to the bad migrations. This is, due to gravity. The bucket quite naturally goes to the bottom, right? You don't need to exert great effort to get the bucket to the bottom of the well, just like we don't need to exert great effort to, end up in unfortunate states. We just do so by virtue of being under the control of our delusions and committing actions, karma, that lead us into that state. But it takes great effort to ascend to the good migrations. We have to exert that effort to practice virtue, to go against the grain of our, delusions and actually move in an upward direction. The quick rotation of the windlass, all the various things that are happening that move the bucket to various places, this rotation within psychic existence is circular in a similar way, and just like this rotation of the windlass, making it difficult to tell where each of the three, our afflictions, our actions, and rebirth, begin and end. These are actually a way of categorizing the 12 links. It said that 3 of the links are afflictions. That's the first link of ignorance, and then the 8th and 9th links of craving and grasping. And then we have the 2 that are actions, the compositional action, that's the second link, and then the link that's called existence, which is the ripened action. That was the second link when it's fully ripened, ready to give us a new rebirth. That's the 10th link. And then every of the other links is part of our rebirth. It's, having consciousness, name and form, the senses, contact, and so on, all of those. And then, of course, aging, birth, and then aging and death. These are all part of what is rebirth. So this circular idea, this is used even by Nagarjuna. He talks about how it's like the wheel of a firebrand. If you've ever been out camping or something and you take a stick that's been in the campfire and of course at nighttime, you have this kind of coal at the end of the stick. You can go like this really quickly, right? And it makes a circle in the sky, in the space, So it looks like a circle, but obviously it's made up of different movements at that time. And so you have different parts of it, but it makes it confusing to see where it is at any particular time, because all you see is this sort of circle that you're making with the light. Anyway, that's another analogy that's used here. But in this one around the bucket and the well, it's the rotation of the windlass that is also circular. That's kind of giving us this difficulty in discerning where are these various factors? Where does one end and the other begin? They actually are quite circular, because once we are reborn, as long as we continue to have afflictions, we create another round of existence and go on to create new actions and so on. And it just keeps doing it over and over again. We should be so dizzy from, this circle game that we're on, in cyclic existence, that we should be ready to abandon the whole thing. The last of these 6 similarities is the battering of the bucket against the sides of the well, because as the bucket's going up and down, it's not staying in just some sort of little middle column away from all the walls of the well. Instead, it is being battered. And within cyclic existence, there's the continual battering of sentient beings by the 3 types of suffering. The suffering of pain, which of course is the most obvious one. The suffering of change, which is the fact that those pleasant experiences that we have are subject to change. They will eventually become the suffering of pain if they are pursued to a great degree, and they are incapable of satisfying. And then even the 3rd level of suffering, or dukkha, which is the pervasive conditioned suffering, that we are subject to suffering by virtue of being under the control of our karma and delusions, and therefore in this unenlightened existence. So those are the points of analogy. And again, I have all these slides. I apologize I didn't give last week's slides to Mary until today, but I have these already all copied into a file, and I'm going to make sure I get it to her later tonight or tomorrow, and she'll have it out there on the website pretty soon. So that's the first type of compassion. It's simply gaining an appreciation for how sentient beings are in this state. Conventionally, this is what's going on, all still merely labeled, but nonetheless, this is what's going on. Now we have both of the other 2 compassions in this one set of lines. And I had A, B, C on there. It's actually technically only 2 lines. It's A and B of verse 4. Because the first part of it, homage to that compassion for, this is all inserted by Jeffrey Hopkins in his translation of this, but we're paying homage to compassion for migrators that are seen as evanescent, that's one of the ideas, and then empty of inherent existence. But they're using the same analogy. A moon that's in rippling water. Of course, they're in rippling water for the evanescence, and then maybe in a calmer, stiller water for it to be seen as empty of inherent existence. Let's look at how this is spelled out by Tsongkhapa. Tsongkhapa says, Chandrakirti's homage to compassion observing phenomena is homage to compassion viewing migrators as evanescent or momentarily disintegrating, like the reflection of a moon in water stirred by a breeze. So I found that nice little photo there of like the rippling water that you can see the moon is not showing as kind of a full moon as it is up in the sky. It's rather this rippling phenomenon. And we've all seen this on a lake or something, and you might get quite fascinated by it, but it's pointing out that, again, sentient beings are all momentarily disintegrating, changing moment by moment. In that way, again, that's contrary to how they grasp themselves and grasp all phenomena in a way that is opposed to that. His homage to compassion observing the unapprehendable, which once more is because inherent existence, true existence, cannot be apprehended in regard to them. They cling to themselves as inherently existent, but it cannot be found to be fact. So homage to compassion, viewing migrators as empty of inherent existence, though they appear to exist inherently, is like the reflection of a moon in calm water. So here I couldn't find a perfect photo, but this is a little painting somebody did. But this can happen sometimes where maybe like you're obstructed from seeing the sky, but you didn't even know that there was necessarily a lake. Say it's nighttime and you're out wandering in the woods or something, and you might see the reflection of a full moon on the lake, and it looks like it's the full moon. You have that moment of like, wow, the moon's really bright and full tonight. But then you kind of look up and eventually you see that it's just a reflection of the moon. A reflection is one of these things that's also used, like in the Vajrakutter similes, that gives us an idea of things appearing to be real in one way, in terms of the reflection appearing to be a real moon or a real face if we're looking in a mirror, but they're not real in the way that they appear. They're only a reflection. They function quite fine as a reflection, but they're not the real thing. The real moon is up in the sky. The reflection is just that. So this is the idea behind these 3 types of compassion. And this is where we can bring this understanding of the transitory nature of beings, as well as their emptiness of inherent existence, acknowledging that why sentient beings suffer, why they have the first level of compassion that we're observing sentient beings in terms of their suffering, is because of their erroneous minds, clinging to that which is impermanent, especially themselves, as if they were unchanging, and then clinging to themselves as inherently existent, although they are empty of that. So hopefully that's a good enough explanation for you. There are some teachings out there on that in His Holiness's book, How to See Yourself as You Really Are. So that's it for my little slideshow tonight. I used a lot of slides tonight. I apologize for that. You didn't get to see me as much, but maybe that's better. So um, I think there may have been a question. There's something in the box. Oh, no, just a thank you. That's very kind. Any comments or questions in terms of what we've looked at tonight, or anything on the whole course? We've got a few minutes. I don't want to keep people here too late because it is already 8:15, but anyone? No? Okay, well, I hope this was helpful. Again, I made these little booklets for you so you could, use this as a tool for meditation and reflection. And I hope that you were able to do that through what we've covered in this class. Know that there are other commentaries that I didn't share necessarily on some of these texts that you can find and elucidate more understanding of. But I thought it would be a nice idea. And this is, again, based on a course I did for Vajrapani last year, I believe it was. 2019, I think is when I did it. And it worked really nicely in a retreat because we could do meditations on each of these. By the way, I couldn't find a written up meditation on the diamond slivers. So you'll have to kind of do that on your own, but nonetheless, you have sort of the tools, the bones of it. You can fill in the flesh, and kind of put a meditation together yourself and coming to understand how, analyze each of these possibilities and come to the same conclusion, hopefully, that there cannot be any inherent production. Therefore, there is emptiness of that. There's a lacking of that. And again, that's the emptiness side of it. And then again, reinforcing the dependent arising. That is the complementary understanding that we have. So, all right, if that's it and no one has any questions, let's do our dedication. Maybe do kind of a special dedication. Not that we're going to recite anything different, but we just might bring to mind more thoughts as we do this. So Bob will get those prayers up on the screen, but we can think back, most of us have been here for this whole course. Think back on all of what we've done through these evenings that we spent together through November and this month, and really feel very strongly that we want this without a doubt to ripen into the fruit of Buddhahood, our own culmination of our potential in that state of complete enlightenment, so that we can then lead others perfectly with that perfect wisdom that we will possess, the perfect compassion, and even the perfect power and ability to benefit them. So we're dedicating for that, motivated in the way that we just looked at, understanding the ways that sentient beings suffer through their own ignorance and wanting them to be free from that. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And then we recall bodhicitta, which is sort of the gas in the tank that gets us all the way to that goal, and wanting this very precious mind that is rooted in compassion and has, an understanding of emptiness within it as well, that we can bring to bear in strengthening this mind. We want it to grow and develop in our own hearts and also to develop in the hearts of all beings. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Then we make prayers for our precious teachers. I've depended greatly through what I've shared with you upon my teachers, especially my teacher Geshe Jampa Gyatso, who taught me so kindly for the 7 years over in Italy. And all of these teachers I've learned from His Holiness, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, even Oso Hita, that I haven't had as much interaction with, but I've certainly learned from him and learned from his predecessor, Lama Yeshe, that he's the reincarnation of. So we are so indebted to these teachers, and we need for them to continue to hang out in this world, to be a force to help us and all beings to achieve our greatest potential. So as we recite these prayers for these three teachers, think that we're creating the causes for all spiritual guides to have good health and long lives, and for us and others to never be parted from perfect guides. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Then for Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjuna's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then for Osohita, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Before we do our final dedication, while I'm on the subject of teachers, something I always try to say too when I teach on emptiness is that you should definitely rely upon the teachings of these great masters and try to be in their presence even. We have the opportunity, hopefully, in 2021 for the Light of the Path retreat in North Carolina to be back in Rinpoche's presence and hear teachings on emptiness from him. He always teaches on emptiness at one point or another. So that's the ideal way to receive these teachings. I don't have any great realizations limitations of this. I have an intellectual understanding to some small degree, and I'm happy to share what I have. But to be in the presence of these great guides and hear their wisdom that they're transmitting, not just through the words they say, but by their presence and their, unbelievable minds. So it's really important to have those experiences too. Let's lastly dedicate for any of the beings that we're holding in our hearts. There's so many that we know or that are in the world at large that are experiencing suffering that we're moved by. Holding these beings in our hearts that are experiencing obstacles or illness, who are dying or who have died. Send this positive energy out to them so that they receive all the benefit from what we've done, all their suffering immediately removed. And then it also ripens into all the perfect conditions for them to know true peace and happiness. And may this also happen for all beings in all realms of existence. May they find true peace and happiness through what we've done throughout this course. Thank you all so much. I enjoyed this a lot, and I'm looking forward to the Heart Sutra. We'll again begin that on, I think it's January 6th or something like that, isn't it? I don't know, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. It's the first Wednesday of January. So I'll look forward to seeing you all then. Maybe I'll see a few of you all during this period. Again, I'll continue to lead the Tuesday meditations next week and the following week. And then we do have one more class in the Wisdom of Emptiness module of Discovering Buddhism on Saturday, and I'll be talking a little bit more about compassion and emptiness at that class, as well as a few things on the two truths. But so you're welcome to come to that if you'd like. But have a good holiday break. Again, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you all soon.